The Legions of Athena, Chapter 1. The kingdom of Minerva was regarded as the intellectual capital of the world and is one of the 12 great Olympian kingdoms, the country which respects knowledge and science above all else. It was ruled by the goddess of wisdom, Athena. She was a wise and just ruler who, due to her tactical brilliance in the battlefield, earned the title of the goddess of war. She ruled from the capital city of Athens, located in the center of the nation. The capital housed such advanced technology that Athens was called the future city by many. The city of Athens was a real beauty to behold as well. It was a well-planned city with a very structured feel to it. From an aerial view, the city was laid out in the shape of a flower with 5 petals. Each of the petals held a different part of the city, namely, the residential area, the military barracks, the industrial area, the entertainment area, and the research and development unit. Each of these sectors had large and oddly shaped buildings, usually increasing in size as they approached the central area. In addition to this, the entire city was encased in a large energy barrier called the Attack-Enabled Giga-Ion Shield, known commonly as Aegis. Thus, it appeared as if the city was encased in a giant snow globe. The central area of the flower-patterned city was home to the great castle of Athena, the Owl's Nest. The castle was large and silver with tall towers that ended in inverted cones surrounding it. Each of the towers looked like large spears aimed at the sky and enclosed the main dome-roofed structure of the castle. Maximus awoke in one of the smaller towers, in the western part of the castle. It had been 2 weeks since Maximus and his rather unorthodox crew had arrived at Athens, after being chased out of his own country Mars. Maximus and his friends finally managed to find refuge in Athens, and right now it was the safest place they could be. Mars and Minerva had been at war for the previous half-decade. In the 5 years of war, Athens had never been breached. This was not due to lack of trying either. Ares, the god of war and ruler of Mars, had left no stone unturned. Thus, after being chased across 2 countries by Ares' soldiers and even his personal champion, any place they couldn't infiltrate was great for Maximus and his companions. His companions, team, friends, Maximus really didn't know what to call the motley group that had accompanied him on the arduous journey to this city. 2 of them were like him, chased out of Mars, his closest friends, Rex and Hedger. Then there was the world-famous inventor Daedalus, who was also one of Athena's personal advisors, and the reason behind the warm welcome accorded to them at Athens. Finally, the man who was probably the only reason they all managed to survive till Athens in the first place, the legendary warrior Achilles. But Maximus hadn't seen any of them apart from Hedger since a few days. Rex had been pretty badly hurt when they got here. He was still in the infirmary wing of the castle, where Maximus and Hedger were not allowed to go. Achilles, on the other hand, was not in the city anymore. Just 2 days after their arrival, he had left again citing something that needed his attention, and he hadn't returned yet. Daedalus visited occasionally, but he was a busy man. A lot of work seemed to have piled up during his absence from the city, and that needed to be taken care of. Hence, it had been days since his last visit as well. That accounted for everyone, well, almost. There was one more member who had made it to Athens, Mia. Mia had joined their group midway because she really wanted to reach Athens for her own reasons. But Maximus hadn't seen her since the day they had reached here. Even though they had stuck together on the basis of mutual convenience, he really thought they had become friends by the end of the journey. Now Maximus had his doubts, since she had not been to visit him or Hedger even once in the West Tower. The West Tower was one of the smaller towers in the Owl's Nest, obviously positioned in the west side of the castle. It was one of the towers in the castle that was reserved for special guests, Daedalus had informed them. At the time, though, Maximus had no idea that special guest meant prisoner. Even though this wasn't completely true, imprisoned was exactly how he felt like here. This was mainly due to the fact that neither he nor Hedger was allowed to leave the tower at any cost. Daedalus had already apologized repeatedly for this, but the matter was out of his hands. The fact remained that they were still citizens of Mars, a country at war with their current hosts. Therefore, they could not be completely trusted, no matter what Daedalus's personal feelings were. Maximus pushed all this to the back of his mind as he finally pulled himself out of bed. The room he was in was pretty small and very plain. There was really nothing in it, only a bed and a small table in the corner. Everything inside, from the carpets to the curtains, was a monotonous shade of dull white. He felt like he was in a hospital instead of a guest room of a palace. The room also had a computer mounted on the wall. This controlled everything inside the room, like the lights and temperature. It could also send and receive messages from other rooms in the castle. He managed to make it to the bathroom and wash his face, finally rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. He looked at himself in the mirror and his dark eyes stared back at him. His hair was black, and he kept it short. It had been that way ever since he was in the Martian army, and he hadn't changed it since. His body was lean and muscular, which worked well for him as he specialized in sword and shield combat, though he no longer had a shield. He freshened up and decided to step out with his sword. As he approached the door to leave his room, the door opened on its own. That seemed to be how everything worked in Athens, automatically. The West Tower had 4 floors and everything could be done at the touch of a button in there. The floor he was standing on had numerous rooms identical to the one he occupied. Hedger's room was right next to his, but he didn't bother going there. It was still really early and he knew that his friend would still be sleeping. Instead, he went via the elevator to one of the other 3 floors, which included a dining area, a library, and a recreational room respectively. Maximus got down at the recreational room, a room meant to entertain the guests who stayed in the West Tower. It had a bunch of ordinary games in it, such as chess, caroms, and even a billiards table. Then it had a wide array of virtual gaming systems that were so high-end that he had never even seen them earlier. Of these, Maximus had really grown fond of one in particular, the virtual arena. Even though it was technically a game, it was in fact an advanced form of training. It consisted of a large square stage, which was filled with motion sensors or something of the sort. Maximus wasn't sure. A pair of opaque glasses were provided for the user to wear. When the game was activated, the user was transported to another world. It was like actually standing in a desert or forest or whatever else the backdrop was. If the user held a weapon, in his case a sword, a similar weapon would be mimicked in the virtual world. This meant that the game was as good as sparring with a real person. The game itself was pretty straightforward. In each level, the player would be faced an array of enemies with increasing levels of difficulty as the stages progressed. The game could be played by up to 4 players. Maximus had played it a few times with Hedger, but anything with too much physical labor was not Hedger's idea of fun, so Maximus usually played it before Hedger woke up. For Maximus, it felt more like an interesting form of training, but right now he was stuck at a particular level. Maximus went ahead and powered up the system. Then he drew his sword and entered the virtual arena. The scenery shifted to the familiar scenario of level 7, the icy plains. All he could see around him was ice and snow. Though he couldn't feel the bitter chill, the details were excellent. He could even make out the silhouettes of snowy mountains in the edges. He looked at himself to see his now familiar virtual armor. It looked like any standard military armor, complete with a helmet and a visor that covered the face. His sword also looked different, but it was still the same size. Also, a health bar appeared in the top corner of his visor. He was checking if the game mechanics were working properly when he heard the sound of a loud horn. This was the signal for the game to begin. Soon they came into sight. The enemies of level 7. They were called ice monkeys, and they appeared exactly what they sounded like. Giant blue monkeys with 2 tails and an armor made of ice. They also held icicles in their hands, which they used as spears. Their tails that were shaped into thick ice were used for attacking as well. Maximus wasn't too worried though. They were tough enemies, but he was confident he could handle them. The only reason he still hadn't cleared this stage was because of the level boss. Each level had a boss at the climax, who was much harder than the regular enemies. Maximus was sure that he would make it to the boss, but he was wary of the ice monkeys and didn't take them too lightly, since they could still reduce his health bar, which in turn would put him at a disadvantage when he would have to battle the boss. The ice monkeys began to attack. Maximus dodged and countered with ease. He was a pretty good swordsman. He had held his first sword at the age of 12 when he was first drafted in for training by the army. He had been using one ever since, but his swordsmanship had greatly improved since he had left Mars, and he had Achilles to thank for that. The great warrior had been tutoring him for a while now. The improvements were astonishing. It also helped that he had a pretty high-quality energy blade now as well, but he was still unsure if the blade should be counted as a blessing, and he had his own reasons for the same. The monkeys weren't too fast. The only real advantage they had were their numbers. But even so, their attacks were repetitive, and Maximus had already gotten used to their attack patterns. He dealt with the first wave without even taking a single hit. He was confident he could keep it that way till the boss, but it didn't go as planned. One of the monkeys had jabbed him on the shoulder. Yet another whacked him with its tail a couple of times. His health bar reduced, but luckily he didn't have to feel the pain. Soon enough, he was up against the final wave, which he managed to tackle successfully. As the last of the ice monkeys fell, he still had more than 75% of his health bar left. With the final wave beaten, he had a few seconds to catch his breath. The enemies may not have been real, but the effort his body had to put into the fights was. An entrance to a cave appeared. Maximus readied himself for what was to follow. Within moments, the ground began to shake, and a huge beast emerged from the cave. It was time for the boss battle. Looming before him, nearly 9 foot tall, was a huge gorilla, aptly named the Arctic gorilla. The beast towered over him easily, and its arms alone were longer than its body. It was also blue in color like the monkeys, and wore a similar armor as well. It had a spiky mohawk made of ice atop its head. If this was in the real world, Max's first instinct would have been to flee, but this was just a game. Moreover, he had already fought this boss 4 times earlier, and lost 4 times, he reminded himself. The battle began as the oversized primate charged at him. Max managed to dodge him. The beast didn't have any weapons, and it didn't need any either. Its arms alone were enough to send a person flying. But this didn't happen in the game. When an enemy touched the player's body, they didn't move at all. Instead, the life bar just dropped. This was what happened a few seconds later, when the gorilla smashed Maximus on the head. Soon it was a full-on battle. Max managed to get more blows on the beast than he received, But the drawback was that each of his attacks did only about 1/4 of the damage of that done by the gorilla. With a shot to his left shoulder, Max's health bar had reached the final 10%, while the beast still had over half of its health left. Knowing that he was about to lose again, he charged straight for the gorilla's head. His final, desperate attempt at victory, as the beast smashed his chest with its fists, bringing the health bar down to 0. The virtual world began to dissolve around him with the words "Game Over" flashing in front of him. This has been a chapter from Book 2 of the new World Odyssey Series, The Legions of Athena. Links to the books in the bio. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this chapter, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. See you in the next chapter.